Well, good evening, everyone. How you doing? My name is Lee Love, and I will be your host here tonight on Photo Mentor TV, here every Friday night at 9 p.m. Eastern, that is, and glad you could join us. Always fun to have you here. The purpose of this show is to help, encourage, educate new photographers and mentor new photographers. So we do this every Friday night, like I said, at 9 p.m., and it's always great to have you here. Let's see here. If you like what we're doing here tonight, by the way, we're going to talk about JPEG versus RAW, and also going to answer your questions that you submitted. If you have any live questions, be sure and go to the YouTube channel, and that would be youtube.photomentor.tv. Or if you're on YouTube and you want to go to the Facebook page, you can go to facebook.photomentor.tv. And but we're good, I think. So anyway, have to have you join us either one. Thanks, Sue Ann. By the way, I did see your comment. Thanks, appreciate for testing that for me. If you like what we're doing here, would really appreciate it if you would send us $50,000. No, sorry, wrong thing here. If all I ask is that you just give us a little like on Facebook or YouTube, like the page, and maybe if you want to subscribe to the YouTube channel, that'd be terrific. Appreciate that as well. It's only thanks we'll really get. And so anyway, we do always nice. And also, by the way, if you're interested, if you're a social mediaite, we're also on multiple sites, of course, just like most people: Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, and Twitter. If you want to join us there, you can. We update that pretty frequently, and I will definitely follow you back if you find that interesting, something you want to do. Let's see, what else here? A couple of announcements before we get into this. One of the things is that we, the first Friday of every month, we do the photo reviews. They're anonymous reviews, so you can feel free to submit your work. Don't have to be embarrassed by it or anything like that. You can submit any work by any camera or experience. It's not, not looking for professional photographers here. And the work is reviewed on composition, technical, and story. So it's not really whether I like it or not. It's really looking at it from an artistic standpoint and giving you some professional tips on how to improve your photography. And if you're interested, you can upload your images by go to review.photomentor.tv and upload your image or two there. And there are a couple of questions we ask you. Want to know how long you've been shooting, just so I can judge and understand. If it's a brand new photographer, then that would explain maybe some information or why you did what you did to create the photo. So feel free to go ahead and do that as well. Let's see. Also, if you are into Facebook groups, we also have a really good Facebook group. It's a little unique. It's different than some of the other Facebook groups you join. So it's small on purpose, and we don't want a bunch of people on there that are know-it-alls. We want people that are willing to help each other. That's one of the things that caused me to create this show and also the group, because I got a little tired of seeing people, demeaned and chastised for being a new photographer, and that's just not what we do here. So anyway, if you're interested in that, go to photomentor.tv/join, and I'd love to have you over there if you're interested. By the way, just a quick tip on that: when you do fill out the application, I noticed some people are not. You have to go to the Facebook page. It'll take you directly to the Facebook group. You have to click the join button, request to join, and then that'll notify me that you've filled out the application and that you want to go ahead and we'll approve it right away, unless you're a spammer, and then we won't do that. So, all right. Let's see here. I think that's pretty much it. as far as announcements are concerned. I think that's it. Probably forgetting something here, but and hello, Amber. Nice to have you with us here. Thank you very much for joining us. Always nice to have a friendly face, and of course, always Donald is on here. Got nice to see you on here as well. Yeah, I know Facebook is kind of weird. I got to tell you guys, I have trouble finding it myself sometimes. When I start to stream, it's like, well, where is it? I can't find it, and so I don't know. It's very bizarre. Seems like YouTube works a little better sometimes. I don't know why. So anyway, thanks, guys. Feel free to ask your questions anytime during the show. We'll be glad to answer them for you. Okay, so the first thing, let's get into this this issue about JPEG versus RAW, and we'll kind of go into that a little bit, and we'll talk about that a little bit, and I'll kind of give you some information on when you'd use one over the other, why one's better in one cases. It's not always, a lot of people say, oh, you got to shoot RAW. Well, RAW is a good way to shoot. There's some benefits to that, but I'll explain to you where maybe JPEG makes sense as well. Okay. Oh, that's interesting. I see now. That didn't come in, or did it? Sorry, I'm looking at my slides here, and I'm not sure they were created the way I wanted them to. Oh, well, it doesn't matter. Okay. So the first thing is, let's talk about JPEG. Now, JPEG is a standard format. It's that's really what the JPG stands for, and there's nothing you have to do special. I mean, as you guys know, you can view a JPEG on a phone, or there's just any device in the world can display a JPEG, which is really nice because there's nothing special you don't have any special software. Every browser can display a JPEG, et cetera, et cetera. The files are typically smaller, and that's because they're compressed. So I would say, I'm just kind of speculating, if you had a 24 megapixel camera, your JPEG would probably be, my guess, between 8 and 12 megabytes, maybe smaller. And if it's a RAW file, it'd be considerably larger, probably closer to 20 megabytes in size. But the downside is it uses what's called a lossy compression. So to be able to get those files down small enough, what they do is they throw away some of the information that they don't think they need, and therefore the quality of the image is reduced. But now that may be okay, because there are times when you need that. For example, when I was working as a photojournalist and also shooting sports, that was all I needed, was a quick JPEG. So what would happen in that case is we would be covering an event, let's say it's some kind of press conference or something like that. We would shoot the first couple of opening, handshakes or announcements, or just and then we'd take that JPEG out and upload it immediately so it could show up so they could print it, or they could put it on their website. The wire service could put it on their website immediately. So therefore, small was important, and size was important. So therefore, or size was important, and also the speed was important, is what I'm trying to say. So therefore, there was a need to shoot. Also, when you're shooting sports, because the files are smaller, it's easier for the camera to keep up with those file sizes. And there is what's called a buffer in your camera. And your camera has its memory, and it writes this memory first, and then from there it writes to the card. So therefore, because the card's never going to be as fast as the internal memory will. Well, if you're shooting JPEG, you can put a lot more images in that buffer. There's more memory available and to write to the card, and so therefore you can shoot, 10, 20, 50. I mean, some cameras, I think, can do 100 frames before they start filling up that buffer. So there's a lot you can do with that, and so there's a reason to shoot JPEG. So anyway, it's not like you can only shoot RAW. The other thing, but again, the downside is the quality is a little less. It's what's called an 8-bit file. So just for some, I'll go over that when I talk about the RAW files. but it's an 8-bit file, which is one of the reasons it's smaller, but it doesn't have as many colors available to it to display. So if you've noticed, you may take a raw file or look at your image out of your camera, looks great, but then when you export it, the quality doesn't look kind of muted, the colors aren't quite as vibrant, and that's part of the reason why. It also has a smaller color palette, which they call, I actually did a video called sRGB versus RGB that I believe is posted in the in our Facebook group. It might be on the public page, but I'm not positive. You can search for it and see if it's on there. But so it does have a number limited colors, and that's because it's an 8-bit file, not a 16 or a 14-bit file. Okay, so let's see here now. Like I said, I think my slides are a little goofed up here. Let's make sure. So, all right, so let's go to this one here. Okay, now if we look at a raw file, raw files are very, very different. Raw files are defined. Let me back up. A raw file is not an image. This is important to understand. A lot of people say, "Oh, can I upload a raw file, or can I, to a printer or whatever, or to a lab or something?" No, you can't do that. And the reason is it's just data. So what happens is a JPEG is the camera takes this instructions, takes the settings in the back of the camera, monochrome, white balance, all that information, and it bakes it into that JPEG image. So the camera is making those decisions for you, or the settings that you've adjusted on the camera are making those decisions, which is why it's convenient, right? So it's already there, done, you're ready to go. You can sharpen the image, you can boost the contrast, you can boost the saturation. Most people don't realize their camera will allow them to do that. But typically, I know in the Nikon it's called picture profile. I'm not sure what Canon and Sony calls it. But you can go in and tweak that. So if you want the colors to be a little more vibrant. So what will happen then is you can sharpen it, etc. When you shoot a JPEG, that will then be baked into the file. So you're done. It's like a print, okay, almost. It's my analogy. But a raw file is not an image. A raw file is data coming off the sensor, and it's being stored. So thanks, Donald. I'll get that right to you. I'll get the answer in just a second. So the raw file is not an image. It's just data. So the sensor records the information, all the sharpening and the the sharpening and the white balance and all that stuff that's you set in the camera for a JPEG is ignored as a raw file. Now, it may put that in. Okay, a raw file also has embedded in it a small JPEG, or you wouldn't be able to preview it. So when you bring up a raw file, let's say in Lightroom, if you guys ever noticed that it pops up and it looks really great, and all of a sudden it looks ugly all of a sudden, what's happening is Lightroom is reading that embedded JPEG, which has the camera settings that you've got adjusted, but then it flips over eventually and will now start reading the raw file, which has no setting. So my point is, the raw file will always look worse. The white balance may not be right. Definitely the sharpening. Some people say, "Oh, my images aren't sharp." Well, that's because you don't want the camera to sharpen your image. You want to be able to do that in post-processing. The white balance may or may not be right. I mean, there's a lot of things. So it's just data. So the point is, you have to go in and process that file. Okay. So the manufacturer will define what that raw file looks like, what the format's all. So Nikon will have a file called an NEF. That's their Nikon RAW format. The Canon will have a CR2 or CR3, I think. And I honestly forgot what the Sony is. But anyway, the extension is different for each one. And that is done by the manufacturer, because they're the ones that write the software. They're the ones that write the firmware for the camera. They know what that should look like and the best way to write that data. So then something like Lightroom or something like that will read that format and then display it. So that's why it's multiple formats, because each manufacturer has their own format. They're larger files because they're typically not as compressed. And if they are, they're compressed very, very little. And that's great. So like I said before, 24 megapixel file may end up being about 20 or more megapixel or megabytes in size. But that's good because you want the largest data. You want as much data as you can to work with. Also, let me make a point about, I see a lot of people complaining about, oh, the files are so big. Well, they are big, but here's the point. Disk storage is probably the cheapest thing that we spend money on. I mean, you can spend $2,000 on a lens that quick, but you can get a 4 gigabyte hard drive for like $100, maybe a little more, but somewhere around there. And so the hard drive and disk space is the cheapest thing that you'll spend money on. You also never want to store your images on your internal hard drive anyway. You always want to store them on a external hard drive. Maybe that's something I'll do next week or an upcoming show on talking about disk storage and how to manage your files. But the point is, it doesn't matter how big they are because disk storage is really cheap, relatively speaking. So it's like the best possible. You want the negative, right? You want that super high quality, because then if you downsize it, make a JPEG out of it or some other format, it's okay to go down. But once it's a JPEG, you really can't go up with it. So that's the point. So the files are large, but that's because they're compressed, but they're not compressed that much. It uses what's called a lossless compression. Let me jump over here to Donald's question real quick before we go any further, just so he's asking, in Canon, should we shoot an sRGB or RGB on the 80D? It really doesn't matter which camera you're using. I recommend you shoot in RGB. Now, RGB stands for red, green, blue. sRGB is a kind of a smaller file. I wish I had the slide here. It shows I didn't expect this question. There's something called a color gamut that will, maybe I can bring it up here real quick. I'm talking to you guys. That will show you that doesn't have as many colors. So if you want to get the most color stored on your original negative, then you want to shoot in RGB, not sRGB. Let me see if I can bring this up real quick to you real quick. Okay, here we go. That's not what I was looking for, but that may work. Okay. So if, do I have this? Sorry here, guys, I'm goof. Didn't mean to be, okay. So let's see if I can show you this. So here is, not really showing that, is it? See if it's because I made it too small. Okay, there we go. So this over here is an RGB. So what you can see is this is showing all the colors that a human eye can see. And this is the outside one, the one that's the most is, I think that's called I think that one's a Pro RGB, which some cameras support. But the one in the middle here, this little square in the middle, is the sRGB. So you can see it doesn't have as broad a color palette or what's called a color gamut that an RGB image would have. Yeah, it doesn't show you this here. I thought it might. Okay. So that's why you want to shoot an RGB, not sRGB. Now, keep in mind that when you take that file and you look at it, now it's gotten a lot better, but sometimes what used to happen is when you looked at an RGB file on a browser, it would look awful. And that's because the browser didn't support RGB color palette. I think that's pretty much gone. I think most everybody does that. Safari, Firefox, and Chrome, I think all display RGB files now. But that is one of the reasons. There could be a difference there. And sRGB is the most common. And if you put it on a website, it probably should be an S. If you convert it to JPEG, most of the software is going to convert it to sRGB for you anyway. But you want your RAW or your negative file to be your RGB. So even if you can store, if your camera will let you write to an JPEG and you need to shoot JPEG then for some reason, try to shoot in RGB as well, because you'll still get more colors even if you convert it down later on. Hope that makes sense. So, all right. So, Donald, that's a great question, by the way. And thanks for asking that. Maybe I need to repeat I should probably do another show on RGB versus HRGB. That's a good idea. Maybe I'll do that next week. So, so there's a conversion required. So again, because these are data files. When someone says, "Oh, why can't I upload a raw file to Facebook, for example?" Well, that'd be like uploading a Word document. A Word document's it's just data. It's not actually, you'd have to have a Word to be able to read it, or some software that can convert it. It's the same thing with a raw file. Because it is a data file, you have to have software to be able to read that. So Lightroom is one program. There's another one called Capture One, which is an excellent program. It probably has one of the best converters, I think, in the business for converting from, other than Nikon, Canon, or Sony. Their own software is going to do a much better job. That's okay. That's okay, Donald. My job is to translate. I knew exactly what you meant, and so even though you said that it was, I knew that it wasn't quite right. I could tell that I knew what you meant there anyway. So anyway, no big deal. Believe me, like I said, that's my job, is to translate. I talk to people all day long that are trying to, because I love working with new photographers. Not everybody knows all the terminology. So my job is to try and figure out what they're asking for and be able to interpret that and translate. So it's cool. Not a problem. Happy to do it. So anyway, sorry. So the thing is, that's why there's a conversion required, which means you have to have software. You have to have Lightroom, Capture One. Again, Nikon, Canon, and Sony all have their own software as well that will do conversion. And typically, I will tell you that their software works best. So let's say if you have a Nikon RAW file, a Nikon, their software is called, I think, NX View. I forget the name of it. They changed it, I think. Anyway, their software will convert their RAW file to a JPEG better than any other software, because they wrote the original format, and they're going to do a much better job. Honestly, between me and you, I think Lightroom has one of the worst RAW converters. When they convert from RAW to JPEG, it's never as good as the other software I've seen available. So anyway. But it is a requirement. So you do have to convert a RAW file into an actual image. And that could be a JPEG, it could be a PNG, it could be a TIFF file. But a RAW file is not an image. It is not an image. It's just data. So this means that you're now the lab. Remember, in the film days, if those of you that remember that, I would send my film in, take it to the lab would process it, I'd get prints and negatives back, okay? They did the work for me. Now I am the lab. So I now have to do that work, which if you're doing this to make money, or you're charging clients, even on a small scale, this is why it's important that you understand that this is work involved in this. So number one, and if you've watched this show, I've answered this question many times. People will sometimes ask, hey, can I get the RAW files? The answer is no, absolutely not, because it's not a file. I don't know what they're going to, it's not an image. I don't know what they're going to do with it. I don't know if they know how to manipulate a RAW file. Plus, that's part of my creative process, is taking and manipulating that file and managing it and color correcting it to the way I see and the way I want to represent my work. So therefore, I would never really give anyone a RAW file, unless it's an ad agency that I work with, and that's a little different because those people have graphic designers and they understand that. But for an end user, I would never ever give a RAW file to anyone. So that's because you are the lab and you have to do the conversion. But the point I was trying to make of this, you need to charge for this. You can't just charge $100 for a photo shoot and not charge for post-processing, because there's work involved, and there's a lot of tweaking. It might be, and it's not just fixing problems. That's a whole nother discussion we'll have. I'm just talking about basic color correcting, sharpening. Like I said, when it comes out of the camera in a RAW file, is not sharpened, not color corrected, not the saturation, contrast. None of that is correct. It's flat. It's supposed to be flat. It's supposed to be ugly, because they expect you to make those changes yourself. That's why you shoot in RAW. So there's a cost involved and time involved that you need to charge your clients for if you are doing this for a living. Okay? And I won't beat that horse to death, but it's something that's very, very, that I think is missed by a lot of new photographers that are trying to go out and start using, shooting for money. Okay? All right. So you're the lab. Now, there's also a lot of, there's a lot of greater, more colors involved in a RAW file, because a RAW file is about at least 12, depends on the camera, 12 or 14, and some of the medium format cameras are even 16-bit color. All that really means is that they have millions of colors available in that RAW file, as opposed to a JPEG, which is an 8-bit file, which does not have as many colors. So there's a lot more information in there, which also means that you can go in and do color correction. You can recover a lot of information. There's a lot of files, for example, that would be that would not, that would either be underexposed or overexposed, that you can pull the highlights out or pull the highlights down or the shadows up to be able to recover an image. This is not a very good example, but it's just this shows you the difference between what the camera shoots and what you're able to do in post-processing, all because there's more data available in that file. And again, it's not an image, it's just data. And so therefore, with the right software, you can pull more information out. Now, having said that, don't get me wrong, we all make mistakes. We all sometimes overexpose. We all underexpose. It's not perfect. Even as long as I've been doing this. So shooting RAW is helpful, and I can go in and if I make a mistake and there's a really great image that I want to correct, it gives me a little bit of latitude. But I'm not a fan of saying just shoot RAW, because if you make a mistake, you can fix it in post. Because once again, that means you're the lab and you're having to spend weeks correcting a bunch of problems that you could have corrected by 2 seconds. So if you've got an image that's overexposed and you saw that on the back of the camera, you could have quickly made that change right there while you're in front of the client, or whatever you're doing the project you're shooting. Make a correction and get it nailed, and therefore you don't have to go through and sit a week in front of a computer fixing problems. So try and get it in camera as best as possible. Believe me, in the long run, it will save you a lot. Plus, that's what being professional is all about. And I'm not talking about shooting manual. It's a different issue, because I don't want to get off on that. We're going to talk about that in a minute. But anyway, so shooting in RAW is helpful, but it's not the way to fix all problems that are mistakes, because sometimes you just can't. If there's not enough, if you're too overexposed or too underexposed, then you're going to damage the image. There's not enough data there. So, for example, if it's overexposed, then may not be enough detail for you to pull that out of the sky. And also, when you do, a lot of times it just turns gray. It doesn't actually fix the problem. If it's underexposed and you're trying to raise the shadows, then what happens is you're also going to bring up the noise. So that's also a problem. I'm not a big one on worrying about noise, but those are the things that you should be aware of there. Just some. Okay. So just to review, so if it's a JPEG, it's a standard format, it's a smaller file. It's a lossier compression, so you're going to get some what's called artifacts. If you notice, it looks kind of edgy, choppy around the edges of some images when you zoom into it. Those are called artifacts. It's going to lose some of the information. It's going to the compression is going to lose it. Also, when you bring in a JPEG, something to consider, and you make a change to it and you save it, then you load it again. Oh, I forgot to do something. I want to put a watermark on it. You load it up, you put your watermark and you save it again, it's also recompressing it. So every time you do that, there's a chance of losing quality. You don't have that problem with a RAW file because it's not an image, it's just data. Again, lower quality, limited colors, and like I said, really those settings are baked in. There's some stuff you can correct, but very little compared to a RAW file. With a RAW file, again, it's not an image. It's data off the sensor. There's a multiple formats, meaning one for every manufacturer has their own format. The files are larger, yes, because they're not as compressed as much, and there's more color information there because it's a higher bit rate. As I said before, a JPEG is typically 8-bit, and a RAW file out of most modern cameras are 12 or 14-bit. If you're into medium format, they can be as high as 16-bit, but typically that's not most people are shooting. So anyway, hopefully that gives you a brief overview of ones. Now, what you can do is you can shoot both. Most cameras will allow you to shoot both. So you can store a JPEG and a RAW file on the card. And then, so if you have to deliver images quickly, like I was giving a scenario of the sports situation, or you're shooting for a magazine or something, and they want those images right there, then you can do both. In fact, some cameras will even let you take, if it has 2 card slots, they'll let you shoot JPEG on one card and RAW on another. And so that'd be another that's kind of handy. I don't typically do that, by the way. And the reason is because I know I'm going to be processing my images. I don't need a JPEG. I'm not going to be handing it. I want to go through and look at every image and edit it and make sure it's correct and do my cropping and all that kind of stuff on it. So I only shoot RAW because I know I'm always going to be bringing them into software, and I also know I'm always going to be processing. I should also mention that a lot of phones, it's getting a little better, but most phones, iPads, things like that, I don't think will support RAW files. A lot of them didn't in the past. I think some of them might be nowadays with Lightroom Mobile and some things like that. But for the most part, you don't want to do that because, again, they're so large and you don't have that kind of storage on a mobile device. So it's not I wouldn't suggest it. But that might be in a situation where you do want to shoot both. You can import the JPEGs into your mobile device, edit them on the road, but you still have the RAW files. Something else I'm going to tell you about that, and I forgot what it was. Oh, so if you do shoot both, when you go to import them in, let's say into Lightroom, only import the RAW files. There's no sense in importing the JPEGs because you're going to convert them to JPEG anyway. So if I were to have any on there, I would only, and it's just going to be, you're going to have duplicate files side by side. It's just going to be kind of annoying because now you got double the images to look at, and so you got to either filter them or so. So just bring in the RAW files and work on those would be my suggestion. Okay. Okay. Hopefully that is helpful. You know, guys, it's really not that complicated, but I know a lot of people have questions about it, so I wanted to cover it tonight. All right, let's see here. No more questions, but let's jump into tonight's questions that were submitted. Okay. So, is this the right one? Nope. Okay, so the first question tonight is from Laura, and Laura says, I have a Canon 80D with a 24 to 72.8, which is a very nice lens, by the way, a 51.8 and an 85 1.8, also very good lenses. What focal length would you buy next? Well, you know, all these questions are kind of hard because it depends on the kind of stuff you're shooting. I don't like to just throw out a lens like most people do, because it's, you know, if you're shooting portraiture, that's a different kind of application, although it looks like you have enough lenses for that. If you want to do wildlife, then maybe that's a different lens you might want to buy as your next lens. But I would suggest that you will buy, if you have a 24 to 72.8, at some point in your buying decision, you will buy a 70 to 200 2.8. It's just a terrific lens. It's great. I've had mine, I think I bought my first one in 2004 when I was switching from film to digital. And I had that thing up until about 9 months ago. And I sold it and upgraded. And frankly, just between me and you, I don't think I can tell a difference. The new version is not that much sharper, may focus a little faster, but I thought the older one might have a problem and it might just need to be upgraded. But I discovered that the problem was an interface problem between the camera and the guy behind the camera, and that was the problem why the images were out of focus. It had nothing to do with the lens. So but anyway, so the 7200 2.8 would be my recommendation. Canon is a great version. You could look at that one. Certainly nothing wrong with that. You could also, the other two would be the Tamron 70 to 200 2.8 generation 2, what they call G2. That's a really nice lens. I've had a number of people that have compared those two lenses and walked out with the Tamron. Sigma has a 70 to 200. Now they had an older version, which they came out this last year, I think, with a newer version. That's the one you'd want to get, and that's also a very good lens. So either one of those, all three of those would be good choices. But I think you're going to find that the 7200 2.8 is the one you want to buy. And the reason is, again, you can use it for a lot of different things. I've used it for portraiture many, many times. And then, of course, if you're doing any kind of event photography, weddings or anything like that, then the 7200 is a great lens to have. You kind of, if you're doing event photography, you almost need two camera bodies, though, quite frankly. The 24 to 70 on one camera body and the 7200 on the other one. So anyway, but that would be my suggestion as far as the lens that you want to get. Let's see here. So Sue-Ann asks, is the JPEG your preferred format? I thought PNG files are better quality. Yes, great question, Sue-Ann. Thank you. Most cameras that I know of do not shoot in PNG. Most of them will shoot in JPEG, TIFF, or RAW, but I don't see too many cameras that shoot in PNG. PNG is a preferred format for me. So if I'm working on a graphic or some kind of design, or if I'm exporting from a RAW file, then the software will usually let me write to a PNG file. And a PNG file does have higher quality. It's a little larger file, but it is a better quality than a JPEG. So if you have the option to export as a PNG, then I would recommend you do that. Great question. Thanks. Okay. So Laura, that's my answer. The 7200 2.8 is definitely the one you want to go with. The next question is from Beth, and Beth says, do you prefer mirrorless or DSLR, and why? Well, this is kind of a loaded question for me because I know a lot of, I see a lot of people on these forums. I have both, by the way. I should shoot both. But if I'm shooting photography, and because I photograph people primarily, I like a DSLR. Now, for video, in some applications, I will use my mirrorless cameras. But I like the DSLR, and here's why. Number one, I like seeing the person's eyes and their expressions real time. In other words, think about it. If you're using a DSLR, you're looking through a mirror and you're seeing exactly what's going on. So I could take the camera and I could move it aside and look through the viewfinder and see exactly the same thing. In fact, okay, but with a mirrorless camera, that viewfinder is actually a little TV monitor. So it's coming into the sensor and it's displaying it on this display called an EVF, electronic viewfinder. So the resolution is never quite as good, and sometimes there's a little bit of a lag. It's gotten better, the newer cameras. But again, I'm looking at a representation of that person. I'm not looking at the person. Now, that may be silly for some people, but maybe it's old school. but I just like that being out. In fact, I would prefer, honestly, not to even have to look through the camera. I wish I could just, in the old days, we used to have a rangefinder or a view camera where you look down and you looked at the person this way so you could see what's, and the reason is, what I've discovered from photographing hundreds and hundreds of people is as soon as you bring that camera up and you put it and you look, they change their expression. You're hiding yourself. You're putting something. You're putting a barrier between you and your subject. And I find it's harder to. It's not, if you're dealing with a professional model, it's different. But if you're dealing with someone that's not used to being in front of the camera, it changes their expression. So I like to hold that camera down low if possible, put it on a tripod even, or like I said, when I was shooting film, use a camera that had a waist level viewfinder, and that's because I could look at them, look in their eyes. Okay, turn your head this way. That's great. Hold that. Hold this, and I'm really engaging with the subject, and that makes a better image, in my opinion, because now you're not hiding behind this camera and they're all nervous what's going on there. So anyway, that's one reason I like a DSLR. Now, let me dispel a myth about the DSLR, and this is something that I think is interesting that a lot of people don't seem to understand, and that is, it was when they first came out, the big claim to fame about DSLR or about mirrorless was, oh, they're lighter, they're less, less weight, but that's not true, actually. In fact, what you're going to find is, and they're more expensive. So here's a comparison between the Canon 7200 2.8L. This is their first generation. Then they have the latest generation with image stabilization. That's what the IS stands for. And then the one on the right is their mirrorless lens. So that, as you can see, that lens is about almost $700 more than the other lenses. And I've noticed this with most manufacturers, that the mirrorless lenses tend to be more expensive than the DSLR lenses. But the myth is that they're lighter. Now, in Canon's case, that actually is true. I did some research on that, and the Canon RF 7200 2.8 is lighter than the 7200 EF mount. But for Nikon and Sony, it's not. They're both about 3 pounds. I think the Nikon was 3.15 pounds for their F mount lens, and the mirrorless was 2.99 pounds. So 0.15 pounds difference between those. And the Sony, I don't remember what the Sony was, but I know the Sony was over 3 pound, a 3 pound lens for the 7200 2.8. So my point is that yes, you will save some weight because the cameras don't have a mirror in them and they can make the body a little thinner. But for weight, generally speaking, you're not going to save that much weight. And so the myth that you've got now, if you're talking about point and shoot or a crop sensor version of a mirrorless, yes, they can make them smaller, of course. Those have been around for years. There's nothing new. A point and shoot has always been a mirrorless camera. Most people don't realize that, but that's exactly what a point and shoot camera is. So that will save you some space and some weight. But if you start talking about a DSLR or DSLR type camera, you will save some weight and a little bit of space in the body, but the lenses may or may not be any different whatsoever. A lot of times they're exactly the same or very, very close. So that's a little bit of the myth about mirrorless. So to answer the question, do I prefer mirrorless or DSLR? It depends on what I'm shooting. Just like everything else. If I'm shooting video, I have the 3 or 4 Panasonic cameras I shoot video with. Those are all mirrorless. Okay? A camcorder is mirrorless. And so those I don't mind that because that's where the final image is going to show up on a TV screen anyway. So I don't mind looking through an EVF, or sometimes I'll have an external monitor connected to it. But for a DSLR, but for photographing people, I do tend to go with a DSLR. I just kind of prefer that feel. And And I like the weight, quite frankly, of a DSLR. It's a substantial weight. It's a bigger. I've got a longer lens. I don't have this little tiny camera body on the back of it. It's more balanced in my opinion. So I don't know if that helps or not, but that is my opinion, for what it's worth. Okay. All right. So the next one is from Karen, who says, this is a common one, right? I love this question or comment. Who has champagne taste for equipment but beer budget, as edited not there, right? And for the current equipment. Well, I think we all have that, Karen. It's common. But the reason I wanted to take this question was because it's not about the equipment. Now, I know people say that, and I know what you're thinking. Well, yeah, but I don't have any equipment, so I really need more gear. And I get that. That's true. It's kind of like, honestly, it's like people saying money doesn't solve all your problems, which is true. It doesn't. But the difficulty is you don't really know that until you have the money, and then you realize, oh wow, I'm not any happier because because money doesn't make a difference. It's the same thing with equipment. I've said this many times on this show. I have way more equipment than I possibly could use, and so I'm as bad as anybody. But what happens is I realize that only by buying equipment. I've got lenses I don't even shoot hardly anymore. I end up loaning them to people, my friends, because if they need them, fine. But the point is, I had to have that lens. And when I bought that lens, so what happens is this: one of two things at least happens for me. I buy a new piece of gear, I upgrade camera body or lenses or whatever. Maybe my images are sharper. Maybe the color's a little better. Maybe it's a little bit lower noise. Okay, that's fine. But what I discover is my images may still suck. They don't change. The work is the same no matter what I'm shooting with. So one of two things happen. One, I get discouraged and just want to sell everything because I realize I'm no damn good. Or number two, I get inspired. I'm like, hey, I spent $2,000 on this lens. I really now need to, now that I know it's not the lens or whatever it is I'm upgrading, now that I know that's the problem, this is the yahoo that's got the problem. Now I need to step up my game. And that's why I tell people education is really a better investment. Because if you learn how to become a better photographer, it doesn't matter what equipment you're shooting with. It could be an iPhone or it could be a Hasselblad. It doesn't matter because you know what to look for. You train your eye and you become a better photographer, not a gear junkie. This is a problem in our industry that I could go on and on about. I call it the shiny object syndrome because we all see cool things, and every 6 months or every 9 months, a new company comes out with another product, and we got to have this, and this one's got this video resolution and 8K this and that, and we all lust after this gear. The joke is it's called gear acquisition syndrome, GAS. But the fact is, it doesn't make us a better photographer. And that's the problem. So anyway, I won't go into any more of that because I could spend all night just talking about that. It's a pet peeve of mine, as you guys probably already know. All right, so let's see here. Let's see what else we got. Okay, so Shia says, is it safe to order a camera off Amazon or online? There's just hardly anything on Facebook Marketplace in my area, and I really want to upgrade. I understand that, Shia. Here's the problem. The difficulty in that is that you can't make a decision. You can, but it's not wise to do so by looking at specs or buying something online from a photo, especially a camera. A camera is a very personal thing. You really need to hold it in your hand. You need to see how it feels. Is it comfortable to you? Does it fit your hand? Because the grips are different. Like, I don't know, one's deeper now. I forgot, Nikon or Canon. I think the Nikon's a little deeper than the Canon, maybe, if I'm not mistaken. I may be wrong about that. But when I pick up a Nikon, because I've been shooting them for a long time, but it has a feel to it. I can tell. In fact, when I picked up a Nikon mirrorless camera, it felt just like a Nikon DSLR, even though it was a completely different camera. When I pick up a Canon, it has a different feel to it. The grip is different. And so that's something you can't tell by buying online. The other thing is you got to look at the menus, because one may make sense to you the way it's laid out, and one may be more confusing. I know that lots of people like Canon menus. Some people like Nikon menus. Some people hate Sony menus. But you won't know that until you buy that system. And so that's the problem with that, is that you kind of need to, hold the camera if possible, instead of, just being able to buy something online on specs. Now, here's something so to answer your question, yes, you can buy on Amazon. They have a very good return policy. It's very, very gracious, but you don't want to take advantage of that. But here's what I advise you not to do if you buy on Amazon. I would advise that you not buy one of these kits that has everything under the sun in it. I've seen way too many people look, oh, wow, look, I got a tripod, I got memory cards, and oh, these two lenses, I got these macro lenses that screw on the front of my lens, and this stuff is junk. I'm telling you, do not buy these kits. Now, people say, oh, I can buy it, it's the same price, I can just throw it away. But I'm telling you, it does not make sense. Most of it's crap. Most of it you will throw away. Most of it you will never use. Like the two items there on the left, and the looks like lenses, those screw on the front of your lens. Those are awful. All they'll do is make your image quality look worse. The memory card they see there is not a very fast memory card. It's the lowest line. You can probably get that thing for next to nothing anyway. Anyway, my point is, I would avoid any of these kind of massive kit systems and try to go to a reputable dealer. And this is the other thing you want to be able to do. Amazon's pretty good about this because the manufacturers have put a lot of pressure on them. Nikon, Canon, Sony, Panasonic have all gone to Amazon. So look, if a resale, because see, got to remember, Amazon doesn't sell most of this stuff. They may sell some of it, but most of it is sold by a reseller. So a reseller, you go to Amazon, you place an order, the order goes from Amazon to the reseller, the reseller gets the order, and they fulfill it and they ship it to you. There's nothing wrong with that. That's fine. But if they're not an authorized dealer, or if the product is an import, what's called gray market, then there's no warranty on it. So that's the other thing, is you want to look at where it's coming from, who's the authorized dealer, and look up their name and find out if they're an authorized dealer on the Canon, Nikon, Sony website to find out. Because if they're not, you have a problem. They're not going to fix it. So that's just Nikon or Canon's not going to fix it, for example. So anyway, I mean to dwell on that, but I've seen it's been sad because I've seen people. And one woman I was working with who bought a lens, it didn't work. She sent it back. They replaced it with another one. It didn't work. So I looked at it and I said, well, this won't work. This lens does not work with this camera. It won't autofocus. Well, I looked at that immediately and could have told her that, but she didn't know that because she bought it online and nobody bothered to tell her. So she had to send it back again. So that's the kind of thing you run into if you're not careful. Anyway, I don't want to go into too much detail. All right, I've got a little more to go to here before I run out of time. What's your advice? I want to start a freelance photography business. Don't do it. No, it's not my answer. A couple things. First of all, you got to make sure your work is, there. But the other thing I'll tell you, let's assume your work is there. We'll cover that some other time. But if your work is where you think it needs to be, I mean, look, we're always going to be wanting to improve no matter how long we've been shooting. We always think our work can be better, hopefully. But there's a couple things you need to keep in mind. First of all, photography business is unfortunately 80% business and 20% photography. This is a lesson that is difficult to learn because we all had to go through it, but I end up shooting a lot less than I used to when I was shooting for myself. Now, it's been a long time. I've been doing this for a long time, but before that, when you're doing this as a hobby, you can shoot whenever you want, shoot whatever you want. And if it's raining, you don't want to go out and do the shoot, or it's whatever, it's cold or whatever, just stay in bed. You can't do that when it's a photography business. Client expects you to be there and to produce results. Also, I spent a lot of time doing contracts, proposals, model releases, all kinds of working, because the kind of work I do, commercial photography and advertising. I'm working on food service. I mean, there's just a whole bunch of things you have to work on. Now, I have people that help me with that, producer, things like that, but still, it takes a lot. So it's not photography. The point is, you're not shooting. You're only going to be shooting 20% of the time. So keep that in mind if you're going to go on this, doing this freelance. Nothing wrong with that. But, it's just something to keep in mind. You probably want to get insurance on your equipment, because if your insurance company finds out you're making any money on this at all, it's not going to be covered if it's stolen. And then the other thing you want is liability insurance, because if you're working and your light stand falls over in someone's home or something and breaks something, you're covered. So that's the other thing. Other than that, I would say get a separate bank account, keep your funds in there separate, and track what you spend money on, whether it be your mileage, your gas, your equipment. All that should go through the business account. I'm not an accountant, but that's kind of the way I've done it. And Donald is absolutely right, as he was saying here. So he's saying that it's also warranty issues. You got to be watch out on the issue about buying online and Amazon. So you got to make sure. This is not, I don't see this very often, but I have seen this. And that is what they'll do is it may be an authorized dealer, but what will happen is they will take out, let's say it's Nikon. They'll take out the Nikon charger and replace it with an aftermarket charger. They'll take out the Nikon battery and replace it with a Nikon battery. Because if they're an authorized dealer, they have to sell the product and advertise it at a certain price. So the only way they can make additional revenue is by removing some of the manufactured products and put in third party, which are a lot less expensive. And I've seen that happen a few times. People were very disappointed. They got this stuff, find out it wasn't a Nikon charger, it wasn't a Nikon battery. And believe me, that can be, the battery and the charger can be the whole profit margin that they would make on a camera. Okay. So hope that helped, Lexi. I know it's not great advice, but if you want to send me some more questions, I'll be glad to try and do that. And you guys can always send me questions to help@photomentor.tv, and I'll be glad to answer them directly or add them to the show. Okay. So let's see what else. So Jenny says, I've been thinking a lot about doing photography. Really want to know what camera lens to buy as a beginner. These are I don't know why I took this question. I hate this question. Quite frankly, I don't hate it, but it just is so common. And the problem is there's no way to tell you that, because everybody is different. And it goes back to what I was saying before. You really have to try the camera, test it, and see what works for you. And I don't know what kind of photography you want to do. So you're a wildlife photographer, sports photographer, portrait photographer. All those may have some bearing on the kind of stuff that you use. What I will tell you, though, is focus, no pun intended, more on learning composition and lighting. I don't care if you're using an iPhone. Those skills will translate to any camera you buy. And if you learn that, you will become a better photographer. I've had many people say, well, why are my iPhone photos better than I got this $1,000 DSLR? And I'll tell you why. You're not worried about the technology. The technology disappears with an iPhone, and all you're worried about is your subject and the image. You're looking more from a creative standpoint, from an artistic standpoint, not from a technical standpoint. And that will make you a better photographer. Okay. So Jason says, I'm ready to advance to strobe flash photography. What's a good budget off-camera flash for at least 400 watt seconds? First of all, excellent, Jason. I applaud you for doing this. Learning to use flash will change your photography forever. It's just the best thing you can do. You will gain not only better images, but you'll gain a whole lot of confidence because you now can shoot anywhere and make great pictures. So it's a terrific step, and I applaud you for doing that. There's a number of products I could recommend. There's one by Paul C. Buff. You look at it, it's called Alien B. A lot of people refer to them. Those are great. The flashes. I've had a number of those in my career. Westcott makes a higher end product. They make some nice products. The one that's because one of the most popular is one called Godox, and both of these are 400 watt seconds, but one is 139, one's 649. Like, well, wow, why is one more expensive? The one on the right, the AD400, is a battery powered unit, and it's going to be more expensive typically. Anytime you find a flash that uses a battery with that kind of power is going to be more expensive. The one on the left is will only use AC power. There's also two other things that you need to look for when you're looking for flash, studio or definitely on camera. One, I recommend it have remote trigger, of course. That's going to be pretty common. All these have remote trigger capability that you can actually dial up, dial down, and turn on and off the flash remotely. The second thing is you want to make sure you have TTL. And what TTL is, through the lens metering. It means that when you make an adjustment on the camera, it will send that signal to the flash, and the flash will make an adjustment. So let's say you go from f8 to 2.8. Well, all of a sudden you've got a lot more light coming in. If you don't have TTL, then you have to go to the flash and dial the flash down and tell it, now I don't need as much power. With TTL, it will automatically do that. Now, having said that, TTL can get you in trouble, and I don't really like using it. What I'll typically do is I'll put it on TTL, take the first shot, let it figure out what it thinks the exposure needs to be, then turn that off. But anyway, the other feature you want is called high speed sync. Typically, it's referred to as HSS. High speed sync will let you shoot over the typical shutter speed most cameras. So a Canon will usually limit you to 160th of a second for flash, off-camera flash. Nikon will be 200 to 250. Some Canons will do 200 of a second. But that's about it. What high-speed sync does, allows you to go over that limitation. And the reason you want to do that is because if you're shooting outdoors, you can overpower the sun. You can really make a nice dramatic sky. Then you turn on your flash and bring up the exposure. I'm going to do a course on this thing, actually, a whole lesson on this. I've been already working on it. So that's the deal there. So you want something that you can remotely control. Want something that has TTL, and you want something that has high-speed sync. And the one on the right does, the AD400, which is probably why it's more money. But in the long run, believe me, you will want one of those features or all of them at one time or another. All right. Whoops. Let's see what we got here. Okay, so Todd asks, I've been given a T5 with a kit lens. Do you recommend I buy a better lens or upgrade the camera? Get a better lens. 50 millimeter 1.8, 85 1.8, something like that. Sigma, Tamron. Prime is what you want probably for your next lens, one that doesn't have a zoom, because it's going to be a little smaller, lower cost, and better quality. And Steven asks, curious how many people shoot in manual without using the display. Is this just experience? Oh boy, I wish I had taken this question earlier, because this is a big one. This is one that drives me nuts, and that is, everybody says, oh, you got to shoot on manual. You got to learn to shoot on manual. You got to learn exposure triangle, and those are important. You definitely need to understand exposure. I'm not saying you don't, but when you're first starting out, shooting on manual turns basically all the features except autofocus off on your camera. So now you're having to adjust everything. You got to adjust exposure, shutter speed, and ISO manually. So now, as he's describing, you're looking down at the camera. You're not looking at the person you're working with. Number one, sends the message to them that you don't know what you're doing. Number two, it takes longer because you're fiddling around with your camera. And so I am not a proponent of new photographers learning to shoot on manual. Shoot on auto, shoot on aperture priority or program. Worry about your subject. Worry about getting the composition right. Worry about your lighting. Or make sure the background is correct. Then worry about the exposure. The camera will do a lot of this for you. If you shoot on aperture priority and you want to shoot with a nice depth of field, shallow depth of field, open the lens up. Let the camera pick the shutter speed. It's probably going to be the same shutter speed you would have picked on manual anyway. Most people don't seem to understand is a correctly exposed picture, an image on manual is exactly the same exposure settings on aperture priority, shutter priority. In other words, f8 at 1/25th of a second is f8 at 1/25th of a second. It doesn't matter what mode it was selected at. If that's what the camera says is a proper exposure, then that's going to be the setting. It doesn't matter if the camera picked it or you set it in manually. So I could go on and on about this because it's a really big pet peeve of mine, but so. All right, running out of time here. So my photos appear grainy. I think it's a lens issue. From do you recommend a cleaning kit? No. Well, I recommend a cleaning kit. I'll show you what the cleaning kit is I recommend. This one right here. I like the Zeiss cleaning wipes. They're pre-moistened. I have some here somewhere, probably. This is what they look like, I think. And I carry them in my camera bag. I use them for my glasses. Some people say don't use them because they take off the coatings on the front of the lens. I don't apply to that. I think that doesn't make. You can rub them off, of course, if you're cranking away on it. But just to rub it gently and use an air blower first. Get the dirt off, for the sand off, and then use that. But here's the point. This is not an issue with the lens. The cleaning has nothing to do with it. This is an issue with ISO performance. So the graininess is not to do with the lens. It has to do with the settings of the camera. Just an experiment. We took a 600 millimeter lens, an f400 lens, 600 millimeter, and we took a big piece of tape, Scotch tape, put it right on the front of the lens. Guess what? You could not even tell it was there. They didn't even see it. The lens wasn't even an issue for the lens. So dirt on your lens is not, unless it's a big giant glob or something, but typically it's not going to be about dirt on your lens. That's not what's going to show up. Now, if it's on the rear lens, that's a different issue. But on the front lens, chances are you're never going to see it. So this graininess you're seeing is an ISO issue. The camera is not capable of producing sharp images or noise-free images at a high ISO performance. Has nothing to do with the quality or the cleaning of the lens. And the last question is from Tony, and she says, I've tried multiple preset companies, but looking for something on a cooler side, I always tend to edit warmer. Tony, dear, oh gosh, don't buy a bunch of presets, please. I mean, presets are nothing but shortcuts. You can make your own or take one that's already there and modify it. All they're doing is moving the sliders around on Lightroom or Photoshop and making adjustments for you. You can do exactly the same thing. So I don't mean to make this sound bad, but they're kind of a scam. Presets are kind of a scam, in my opinion, because number one, all they're doing is, again, moving sliders around, which you can do yourself. Number two, it's going to look like everybody else's picture if you do that. If you just use their presets, because that's the same one somebody else bought, and they're going to apply the same one. And number three, why not create your own look, your own style, your own vision? And you can do that yourself. If you want to buy a preset and look at what their settings are and how they've developed it, what they've used to create it, that's fine. But then from there, learn what they're doing and make your own presets, because you're always going to get better quality presets. You're always going to get your own look. Plus, every image is different. Every shoot is different. In my opinion, the lighting's different. The location's different. The background's different. The camera may be different. So one preset is not going to make sense to apply to, number one, every image, even in on one project. And number two, certainly not across multiple projects. So don't waste your money on presets. Make your own, learn how they work, and create your own look and style. If you like a warmer edit, then just there's ways to do that within learning, editing your in Lightroom. I assume that's what you're using here to do that. So, anyway. All right, listen, I appreciate everybody's time. Once again, just to remind you, we are, the first Friday of the month is, we do photo reviews. And if you want to submit your photo for the, to be looked at, we'll do it. Reviews are anonymous. Any camera experiences you can use, doesn't matter what you have. And they're reviewed on composition, technical, and story. So we apply the same criteria over all the images, no matter which ones are, or no matter how experienced you are or not. And we can help you with that. So if you're interested, send your images to review.photomentor.tv. Go out and fill out a couple questions and submit that. Also, if you are on social media and you want to follow us there, then hey, we'd love to have you do that. I will follow you back if you follow us on Twitter or Instagram or whatever, Facebook, and that would be terrific. I would appreciate if you would do that. So, and if you're interested in joining our Facebook group, then you can go to photomentor.tv/join. Be sure, and once you're done with the application and you're sent to the page, then to the group, then be sure and click the join button. So that's it. Hey, listen, thanks everybody. I enjoyed this week again, and hopefully this has been helpful to you. If you have any questions, again, be sure and send them to help@photomentor.tv. Love to answer your questions or help you in any way I can. So, again, thanks, and see you next week.